Hello friends, it's Kayla. Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm talking to you about my 10 favorite books of 2022. I know a lot of people don't rank their top favorites. They just say, these are all my favorites, no particular order. Mine is a particular order. My number one is my number one, number two is number two, number 10 is Death in Her Hands by Ottessa Moshfegh. This is about a woman who goes for a walk in the woods and finds a letter insinuating that there has been a murder or not, and she decides to solve the murder, but there's no clues, there's no dead body. I took this as a big metaphor for novel writing. Our main character is an older woman named Vesta, and she theorizes about this murder, who could have done it, who the victim was, and as she encounters different people and situations throughout her time on her walk, she creates these scenarios she thinks might exist. It's pretty slow, very internal monologue heavy, introspective, and at its heart it's a story of obsession, which I think a lot of my favorite books have in common. This wasn't even on my TBR, but my friend Sage invited me to a video series, and I was made to read this, and it went so much better than I could have ever expected. In my number 9 position, as I explored lighter mysteries this year and satire, Jamila Green Ruins Everything by Zarka Nawaz is in that 9th spot. In this story, we're following an American Muslim woman who is a wife and a mother, and she infiltrates a terrorist organization in the name of becoming a best-selling author. There's a lot more nuance to it than that, and I just think that the choice to highlight things like foreign policy and propaganda and xenophobia through this comedic lens, I guess, and through this series of just absolutely ridiculous over-the-top scenarios, it was very fun and interesting at the same time. It's also this story of redemption. Jamila is working for something, finding something she cares about, questioning her faith, reconnecting with her family. There's a lot going on in here. It was just a wild time and a very gutsy book that I appreciate being put into the world. In my number 8th position is Daughter of the Moon Goddess by Su Lin Tan. It follows a young woman named Xingyin, and her mother has been exiled to the moon, and essentially she has a goal to get her mother out of exile. It leads her down lots of different paths. She experiences tons of different things, and my favorite thing is how many roles she plays throughout the story. She has to get in front of the right people, be granted a favor, disguise her identity in a way to get what she wants, and throughout that, she ends up being the companion to a prince. She ends up being an archer in the army. She ends up being kind of a fake governess. And you just follow her throughout the experiences of her life. It's a pretty light fantasy. The stakes are relatively low in that all of the issues are resolved pretty quickly and easily. And overall, it was just really fun following her journey. It had a lot of elements that I enjoyed. There was a fun competition to follow. There were training sequences. There was one of my favorite love triangles I've ever read. I reread this a couple times this year, and every time it was equally impactful for me. In my number 7 position is Kindred by Octavia E. Butler. This was another one I wasn't planning on reading this year, but I pulled it out of my members TBR jar from my friend Josh. And again, it just has so many elements that I enjoy. We're following a writer. It involves non-consensual time travel. I also just love stories where a person is thrown into an unfamiliar situation. They just have to like bumble around and figure out how to exist. The book kicks off with our main character Dana in the 1970s in California with her husband, and suddenly she appears in 1824 Maryland on a plantation. She ends up encountering various ancestors of hers and goes from being a bystander and a witness to slavery to being in danger herself because she cannot control when she's going back and forth in time. From there, she has to adapt and integrate into these absolutely horrific conditions and decide how much of the past she can change. She wants to be a positive influence on these people. She wants to share her knowledge. She wants to educate, but there's this fear that if she changes too much, she retroactively will not be born. There are these beautiful flashbacks to current day with her and her husband and just like the love that they share. It made for such an excellent, fast-paced and like fun but heart-wrenching experience. And I mean, I don't need to recommend Octavia Butler to anybody, but I do. I would. She's obviously a genius and everybody already knows that. Spot number 6 goes to Finley Donovan is Killing It by Elle Cosimano. This was my introduction to lighter, cozy mysteries and kind of changed the trajectory of a lot of my reading. So shout out to the people who introduced me to this book in the first place and the reason that I read it. Gabby, Nakia, Mayana, and Katie. This was on all of their favorites books of last year, and I enjoyed it so much, and I feel like it's getting a little overhyped now. As in, I know a lot of people pick it up and maybe they're expecting a different type of, it's really just fun, ridiculous, silly, and wacky as Finley Donovan finds herself in a murder for hire scheme by accident. She's an author, she's pitching her book, and somebody overhears, thinks she's a hit woman, and offers to hire her. As Finley is a recently single mother. She is desperate for money and considers taking the job. It is infuriating following Finley and the poor decisions she makes, but there's also just this fun sidekick situation. There is a love triangle. It again has my favorite trope of a woman just thrown into unfamiliar circumstances and just figuring it out. I definitely would not recommend it as the most sophisticated, shocking, highbrow mystery thriller out there, but I had such a good time, it had to end up on my list. Moving into the top 5, in the 5th position, we're switching gears a little bit, but not too much. This is the other mystery thriller on this list, and it's Confessions by Kane Minato, translated by Stephen Snyder. A very different tone though. My channel was really built on mystery and thriller reads and a lot of domestic stuff. A lot of it ended up starting to blur together, and I stepped away a little bit more and more every year from what I was reading. And then there's something that comes along like this and reminds me why I love the genre and how much there is that is different that exists within it. And it really just refreshes my love for reading. So this was a book club selection. It was suggested by a book club member. I'm so glad that it was. It is a psychological torment of a book. We're reading from 6 different POVs, and the book kicks off with a teacher who is giving a lecture to her students, and throughout that reveals certain secrets regarding a tragedy that's happened. I definitely don't want to give any more away than that, but each section ends with a twist, a reveal that is so fun. We're following a range of people, including some very young students, and just their thoughts and their actions are a lot to read, and it was just a very interesting time. In my number 4 spot was a highly anticipated science fiction book that had been on my radar for a while. It is How High We Go in the Dark by Sequoia Nagamatsu, also one of the most beautiful books that I have ever read. This is a book of connected short stories. It kicks off with an ancient plague being unleashed upon the world from the Arctic. And the stories go throughout the following many decades, following different people, and just a little peek in at humanity and how people respond to tragedy and grief. It has a pretty small cast. It's very intimate stories, and I love how you find out that they're all connected. The stories themselves range from things like putting human characteristics into a pig, following euthanasia for children, a hotel full of dead bodies. As the plague itself and how it affects the human body is very speculative in nature, that's also where a lot of the stories lean. I just found it very interesting following all of these stories, but at its heart, it is a devastating novel about loneliness. Now let's move into the top 3. If you've been around my channel this entire year, these are easily predictable. In the 3rd spot is the book The Most Precious Substance by Sarah Gran, which is another story about obsession and exists within the book world. We're following a rare book dealer named Lily. Her husband is dealing with an illness, and she is being tasked with finding this extremely rare book about sex magic. There's no real proof that it even exists, but there's rumors that if you perform these various sex acts, yes, it's a very sex-heavy book, it is going to give you certain powers or just everything you've ever dreamed. It was absolutely ridiculous, over the top, a common theme with my reading for sure, where she just goes on this series of adventures with this other guy, maybe decides she needs the book herself and wants to perform things for the book herself. But it's just about the wild people she encounters, the scenarios she finds herself in. She's making various connections with people. I know this is technically categorized as horror, but I don't really know where to place it genre-wise. I just want to thank my friend Gavin for introducing me to Sarah Gran this year, because this was such a win. In my number 2 spot, of course, is The Pallbearers Club by Paul Tremblay. This is, I think, my 5th Paul Tremblay. This one I can just take credit for loving myself. I knew I would love it. I knew it would be everything that I wanted, and it was. Though it's not for most people. I am very hesitant to even include it, and I feel like a disclaimer is needed that my favorites list should not be taken as a recommendation list. So all of you who I know are out there who are going to build a TBR based off of this, don't you dare say I recommended it. It shouldn't really be categorized as horror. The synopsis itself is kind of misleading. It's more of a general fiction story, and it's about an author, and you're reading his memoir. It's this kind of coming of age story, but it also spans multiple decades of this man's life. And he has this best friend in high school, and they start the Pallbearers Club together. The club's not really that much a part of the book, but throughout it, Mercy, is annotating Art Barbara, our main character, our author's life story, life experience. She's critiquing not only his memories, his opinion and perspective on her, but also his writing and his grammar. It's a very self-aware book. It's pretty pretentious, and I just had so much fun. I read this 4 times this year, twice physically, twice via audio. I would recommend it on audio because I think it's kind of easy to skip over her annotations or not read them until the end of a page, and the audiobook just does such a great job of inserting her commentary at the right place with just the right of tongue-in-cheek style. It's very overly angsty. It's kind of about nothing. You can just add it to my list of favorite books that have no plot. It's not really scary or supernatural, but Art Barbara is convinced that his friend is a supernatural creature, perhaps a vampire, and he's giving his evidence. As a reader, there's so many things to consider, and I just think the ending was so thoughtful and beautiful, and I love this so much. And in my number 1 position is the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin. After reading and loving Dune last year, I thought it was imperative for me to pick up some more science fantasy, especially adding some diversity. My expectations for this were very high considering it's award-winning, it's so many people's favorites, and those expectations were absolutely met. In this, we exist in a world where there is recurrent seismic activity that absolutely devastates the world. It's a post-apocalyptic, it's a little bit mystery. We're following a couple different POVs. One of them is a mother, and there's a big mystery plot line because one of her children has been killed and one of her children is missing, and she goes on this journey to figure out what happened and why. But we're also just following a couple perspectives of people who have powers to control these earth shakes and getting in control of that power, learning about their power, honing it. As a thriller reader, the twists and turns and reveals were very much for me. As an enjoyer of odd perspectives in books, the multiple POVs and the insertion of second person really worked for me, as it often does. And as a reader who likes real world and timely discussions, this had a very intentional look at oppression and imperialism and fear response. There's so much to learn within this world. I was probably halfway through before I really understood what was even going on. Completing the series was a real success for me, though the other books weren't 5 stars. I think there was a clear goal in mind, and I just had a lot of fun reading it, though it's very dark and heartbreaking. N.K. Jemisin does not hold back with making her characters go through it, and it was just such a fascinating, genius piece of work. So that's my top 10 in case you were waiting to take a screenshot. Here it is. And also I have an equally, or actually bigger stack of honorable mentions. But rather than getting into all of this here today, I'm gonna make another video tomorrow full of top 5 lists and superlatives. So if you're interested in that, I will see you tomorrow. Otherwise, thank you so much for watching. Hit the subscribe button if you're interested, and I will see you later. Bye.